Welcome to Golden Recaps. In today's video, we'll be going through the 2012 action thriller film, Jack Reacher. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, and press the bell icon so we'll bring you more interesting recaps like these. The movie begins and in the opening scene, a man drives out to an empty building. He surveys a park not too far from his position and soon he starts shooting at several targets who appear to be random, killing most. Later, a couple of armed policemen storm the building in search of the shooter. Emerson, the detective lead on the case, goes through the crime scene. He finds a bullet and a quarter at the scene. They run an analysis of the evidence and the fingerprint of a man named James Barr comes up. Barr is found in his home and arrested with compelling evidence, linking him to the shooter, found in his home. Barr is interrogated at the station by Emerson and the DA, Roldan. Emerson commences by threatening Barr that he's likely going to face the death penalty, which the DA prefers, but he wishes to see Barr live a long life in prison. Emerson then tells Barr Roldan feels generous today and is willing to let him take a pic if he confesses to the murder of the victims at the park and waives his right to counsel, saving himself and the city a costly trial. Barr takes the paper to sign the deal. Roldan celebrates their quick victory, but they are shocked when Barr inscribes on the paper the words, "Get Jack Reacher." The police immediately begin digging, finding clues as to who Jack Reacher might be. They could only find clues of who he was before he disappeared. Emerson briefs Roldan that Reacher was born and raised in the military on bases abroad. Reacher was a distinct military personnel who served the U.S. military in several countries, earning multiple medals and attaining the status of major. Reacher also spent the bulk of his service as a police in the military. While they keep talking, Reacher walks into Roldan's office. Reacher is taken to see Barr. Roldan asks Reacher why he was mentioned as a witness by Barr. Reacher, doubtful, asks for proof, which Roldan refuses. Reacher leaves abruptly. While they try to stop him from leaving, Barr's attorney, Helen, shows up. She's upset that Roldan and Emerson might have been speaking to her client without her presence. Reacher is surprised. She's Barr's attorney, and Emerson introduces her as Helen Roldan, the district attorney's daughter, which makes him even more surprised. Reacher inquires if it's even legal for Helen to go up against her father in court, to which she replies fortunately it is. While Helen tries to depose Reacher, stating that he's her only defense witness, thinking Reacher is friends with Barr. He clarifies that he and Barr aren't friends and in fact, the only reason he's here is to bury Barr. Helen interviews Reacher further over coffee. She tells Reacher that her father has never lost a capital case because he never picks a fight he can't win. Every murder suspect is given one of two options, either to confess or face the death penalty, against a DA that never loses. Helen strongly believes that more than one innocent man has been put down without a fight. Reacher responds she's fighting on the wrong side this time, as he has no doubts that Barr is guilty. Reacher then tells Helen a little history about Barr. He tells her Barr joined the military because he was the kind of man who wanted a legal means of killing. Barr made sniper and he trained hard, firing about 2,000 rounds each week. Barr had been taught to visualize the base of a man's skull with every shot. Finally, he gets deployed to Iraq, and for 2 long years, he is kept on overwatch, never once firing a single shot. The war ends, and Barr finds himself unable to scratch the itch of not for once firing at a human target. The day before he leaves, he takes his gun and kills 4 civilian contractors who had been hired by the military. Although he covered his tracks well, he got caught by Reacher and confessed. Helen asks why he wasn't in prison then. Reacher explains that the 4 men had just recently been on a rape rally of 28 women, and someone within the corporation wanted everything swept under the rug. Helen deduces that he was about to hand all this information to the DA. Reacher tells her that the last time he saw Barr, he made him a promise which he came over to keep, but realized he doesn't need to, after seeing him in the condition he was. Helen tells Reacher that Barr might get away this time also, as he was injured in state custody, and she's going to declare him unfit to stand trial. Helen asks Reacher to be her lead investigator and look through the evidence objectively. Reacher agrees, but on the condition that she also looks into the victims objectively. Helen visits Mr. Fourier, the father of one of the victims. She tells him she's hoping to get a better sense of the victims. He asks if she's spoken with the other families, and she confirms that she has spoken to those who would speak to her. Then he lets her in. Meanwhile, Reacher is at the crime scene, and after some observations, he notices something quite unusual. But what does he notice? We'll find out in a bit. Mr. Fourier hands Helen an article telling her everything she wishes to know about his daughter is in there. Helen becomes scared after seeing a gun on the table and tries to leave. He stops her, asking why she would defend a man who took everything from him. Helen, realizing she's made a mistake coming to his house, apologizes and leaves immediately. While she's about to drive away, she's accosted unexpectedly by her father. He asks if it's true she's been talking to the victims' families by herself. She asks him how he knew and how he found her. He replies that she isn't the only one with the right investigators and warns that Reacher can't be trusted, as she knows very little about him. Roldan pleads with his daughter not to make a terrible mistake by choosing to fight him on this case, as she might ruin her career all in a bid to hurt him. This vexes Helen, and she leaves abruptly. Reacher also takes a look at the evidence gathered by the police at the station. Emerson assures him he's free to come back to take a look anytime he wants. Reacher responds that he doesn't need a second look. Emerson, shocked, states that he didn't take any notes. Reacher also responds that he doesn't need to. Emerson asks Reacher about his job as a cop in the army. Reacher replies that it's pretty much the same as his, except every suspect was a trained killer. Before leaving, Reacher ponders over why Barr might have paid for packing, considering that he was about to kill 6 people, but was worried about the meter maid. Emerson answers that it might have been out of habit and muscle memory, and probably didn't know he was doing it. Emerson asks what the serial number was on the riffle, and Reacher responds by asking what the date on the quarter was. After telling Emerson it was 1968, he leaves. Reacher then walks into a crowded bar, and he's soon approached by a young lady. She tells him her name is Sandy. He tells her he was also Sandy, last week, on a beach in Florida. She asks for his name, and he tells her
Jimmy Reese.
Not expecting that, she tells him he doesn't look like a Jimmy. After a little cheat chat, she asks if he wishes to leave the bar for a more quiet place like her car. Reacher asks her if she's old enough to drive, and she tells him she's old enough to do a lot of things. Reacher tells her he won't be able to afford her. Sandy, shocked, immediately claims that she's not a hooker, and she works at the auto parts store. Reacher explains to her that the cheapest women always tend to be the ones you pay for. This vexes Sandy, and she stands up annoyed, yelling that she isn't a hooker. This attracts the attention of a gang of young men who in turn claim Sandy as their sister. Sandy claims that she was called a whore by Reacher. Reacher explains that nobody said whore, telling them she inferred the word hooker, but he meant slut. The leader of the gang asks Reacher to step outside, as he was going to beat his ass, and it would be his choice if that were to happen in the bar or outside. Reacher agrees to step out. When they all walk outside, Reacher warns that this is their final chance to walk away, but they ignore his warning, stating that he's outnumbered. A fight ensues, and Reacher takes out the leader with a few moves, before fending off the rest of the gang. Soon the police arrive, and they run away, leaving Reacher, who's asked to go to the ground. Reacher now realizes he has been set up. Reacher is arrested, and Helen comes to the station with Emerson to bail him out. Emerson tells Reacher he's starting to understand why he moves around a lot. He leaves and Helen scolds Reacher. Helen tells him that whatever he does while working as her investigator is a reflection of her and her firm. Reacher apologizes and explains that a girl came onto him and picked a fight. He tells Helen that the girl knew who he was, and the cops rolled in before the fight even started with her brothers, making him believe someone had set the whole thing up. He asks Helen about her day, and she tells him it went exactly the way she thinks he hoped it would. Then he asks her what she's learned. Helen gives Reacher the details of each of the victims, starting with Chrissy Ferrier, who was 22 and a nanny, caring for the 6-year-old daughter of family friends. She had planned on leaving for China the week before, but the 6-year-old girl she cared for wanted Chrissy to stay for her 7th birthday, and both were en route to pick out a dress that day. Rita Coronado was a cleaning lady at a plaza who had a 9-year-old son she dropped off at school each day before work. Rita was on her way to pick up tickets for her son's first baseball game that day. Nancy Holt had told her husband she was taking her car to be serviced that day, but instead she was headed downtown. Line Archer was on her way to secure a loan to save her late husband's construction business she had always hated, because she could not bring herself to sell the company. Darren Sawyer was an investment broker in the same building Rita worked. His wife said they'd grown increasingly distant, and their last words to each other weren't kind. His body was found next to a bouquet of roses he bought on his way to work. Reacher tells Helen that about 2.5 million Americans die every year, and 5 of them dying on the same spot on a single day doesn't seem quite random to him.
I'm sorry, could you please put a shirt on?
This is my shirt.
Reacher comes up with a claim that Darren and Nancy might have been in an affair, and that is probably why Nancy kept walking whilst everyone ran. Helen asks what his point was, and he tells her that 2 of the victims might have not been there by chance. Reacher asks Helen to help him get Barr's credit card statement, as he would require a list of all the places he hung out. Helen asks what he was hoping to find, but he tells her he needs some sleep. He picks up her keys and gives them to her, then he tells her to come pick him up the next morning at 7. Later that night a man who had been following Reacher drives to meet Charlie and the Zek. He gives them information on Helen and Reacher. He tells them he suspects Reacher might know something, so he took steps, but it ended up blowing back on him. Charlie grows upset, telling him he was out of place making such decisions, as they have a process of doing things that they stay done. The Zek comes out of the shadows and the man is terrified. He pleads for an opportunity to fix his mistakes. The Zek tells him that he has no chance of fixing anything, but he would have use of him if he could show he was rare and willing to do anything to survive. He's asked to chop off his fingers with his teeth. Unable to meet the Zek's demand, he gets shot in the head. The next morning, Helen gives Reacher Barr's credit card statement and witness testimonies. She tells him Barr's CC statement was a dead end as all he bought was gas and groceries. Reacher asks her to help him find gun ranges of 100 miles to 150 miles from their location. Helen wants to know why, and Reacher points out that Barr consistently filled his tank and took long drives on the weekends. Reacher asks Helen to drop him off at the auto parts store, which she does. He walks into the store, sees Gary the store manager, and requests to see Sandy. Gary asks to see some ID, and Reacher tells him he would be seeing the inside of an ambulance instead if he tries to stop him. Now speaking with Sandy, Reacher asks where he could find Jeb. After giving Reacher his address, she asks if she's in trouble. Reacher shakes his head and asks for her car keys. Before he leaves, she tells him that she gets off work by 6. Reacher advises that she seems sweet, pretty, and smart. He tells her she doesn't have to let herself be used by the guys she finds herself with. She replies that it's just what girls like herself do. Reacher also advises her to leave town. Then he goes to Jeb's house. He meets an old lady at the door who says nothing to him, then he enters, and searches the house. While still in Jeb's house, Reacher is attacked by 2 men who are very enthusiastic to get their hands on him. Although caught in a tight position, he manages to fend off the men and finally put them down. Then a third guy, Punk, walks up behind him pointing a gun at his head. Reacher defends himself by seizing the gun. He asks Punk for the whereabouts of Jeb, and he replies that the last they spoke Jeb had told him he was going to meet up with a guy. Reacher takes his keys and leaves. Reacher goes to Helen's office. In there he informs her that Jeb, the guy from the bar, is dead. Helen asked Reacher how hard he hit him, and he explains that he wasn't the cause. Jeb was murdered and someone tried to make it look as though he left town. Reacher then tells Helen that 99% of the evidence her dad has did not exist in Baghdad, not because Barr was smart, but because he was trained. Reacher explains that from the garage, the shooter had the sun in his eyes, with targets moving left and right, making it difficult conditions for any sniper. Reacher assumes that with the training Barr had, Barr would have taken the shots instead from the bridge, which would have given him more ideal conditions. Helen asks what Reacher was getting at, and he tells her he believes Barr is innocent, as Barr was incapable of firing 6 perfect shots in such poor conditions. Helen accuses Reacher of stringing up theories, as she believes he doesn't want this case closed, as it might be his last. She tells him her father was right, and how it all makes sense now. Reacher then shows her the car which has been following him all day. He gives her the tag number, asking her to run a search on it. At the same time, the Zek receives a call, and he later informs his men that their cover has been blown. Meanwhile, Helen receives information that the number is registered to a company called Lebendauer Enterprises. They discover that the conspiracy had been to kill 4 random people to hide one specific target. Someone needed O-Line Archer's construction business, and she wasn't willing to let it go. Helen tells Reacher that it's just a theory. Reacher assumes that whoever framed Barr knew about Baghdad, and the only person who could have given that information was Barr himself. Reacher tells her to help him find any close associates of Barr, as that would lead them closer to finding the killer. Helen argues that finding the shooter isn't her job, and even if she believes Barr is innocent, she's unwilling to take any of this to court. Reacher thanks her for the coffee and leaves. Sandy is getting ready to leave town when she comes across Charlie. He introduces himself as a friend of Jeb's and tells her she must have been pretty wasted during their previous meeting, not to remember him. Charlie tells her she looks great, and if she would mind grabbing a drink with him tonight. She tells him she's meeting some people and opts to leave when she's knocked out by another of the Zek's thugs. The next morning, Helen goes to meet Reacher, and she gives him the location of a gun range that matches his requirements. She tells him to rest as he has a long drive the next day. Reacher warns Helen that 4 random people were killed to cover up the murder of O-Line, and if he's right, just saying her name could get her killed. Reacher warns her to be careful. Emerson and the police find Sandy's body in a dumpster close to her apartment. Reacher arrives at her apartment and finds the police taking out Sandy's body in an ambulance. Emerson sights Reacher, and after staring at him for a while, he angrily begins a chase. In pursuit, Emerson calls for backup and air support. Although being considered the suspect, Reacher also chases after Charlie on a highway bridge. They get separated by a tunnel for a while, but Reacher bumps into a row of roadside water containers at the tunnel end. His engine fails to reignite for some time, but his car starts after much effort. The chase continues and Reacher keeps going after the Zek's men, but they manage to evade him when he gets blocked by the cops. Now, to save himself from the raging cop cars and helicopters, he sees an oncoming bus, and he steps out of his slowly moving car to join the passengers waiting to board the bus. They provide him with cover until the bus arrives, and Reacher successfully evades the cops. DA Roldan tells Helen a warrant has been issued for Reacher's arrest, as they have got a strong reason to believe Reacher was responsible for the death of Sandy. Helen refuses to believe the accusations that her dad and Emerson tell her about Reacher. An argument soon ensues between Helen and her dad. She tells them she has no idea where Reacher might be after he left her office that morning. Helen gets a call from Reacher, and he tells her he's being framed just like Barr, and Sandy was killed because they want him to run, but he won't. He tells her he thinks either Emerson or her dad has some affiliation with the bad guys, as he's been followed from day one, and only she and both of them knew he was in town. Reacher visits the gun range, and he meets Mr. Cash, the owner. He tells Mr. Cash he's looking for a friend who served with him in Iraq. Mr. Cash asks if his friend has a name, and he responds James Barr. Mr. Cash tells him he's never heard of anyone with that name before. Reacher then explains that he's not a cop, and he's only here because he believes Barr is innocent. Mr. Cash gives Reacher 3 bullets, and asks him to hit the target with all of them, and maybe then they can talk. Reacher takes a shot. Mr. Cash is impressed and he tells him he would answer one question. Reacher asks who his best shooter was, and he replies that Barr was his best shooter. Mr. Cash hands Reacher all of Barr's targets, and Reacher claims that Barr isn't as good, even on his best day in the army. Reacher tells him it's possible Barr had a friend, who he let switch the targets on the range. Reacher asked if Barr came alone, and Mr. Cash shows him the footage of Barr and his associate coming into the gun range. Through the footage, they can see Charlie's face. Meanwhile, Helen discloses to her father all the dirt she could dig up on Lebendauer Enterprises. Roldan doesn't buy into any of it, and he tells her she's beginning to sound delusional. Helen tells him that all of this information was pulled out under her name, and if what Reacher said was true, then her life is in danger, and whatever happens to her would be on his head. Roldan assumes she's testing him, and he tells her she might find it hard to believe, but he does love her, and if she believes she's in danger, then the next thing to do would be to put her in protective custody. Helen refuses and leaves. When she gets into the elevator, Emerson also rushes to catch up with her. While there, she realizes Emerson might be the mole and tries to escape, but he tases her. Then she's kidnapped by the Zek's men. Reacher calls Helen, but Charlie picks up and tells him he has her, and if he doesn't show up in the next hour, he's going to hurt her. Reacher tells him he doesn't care about Helen, and he has his picture which he's taking to the feds, then he hangs up. After a moment, he calls back and tells Charlie he wishes to kill him, and when Charlie tries to enforce he was going to kill Helen, Reacher hangs up again. Then he calls back again. This time he tells Charlie that he's no hero, and he's got nothing to lose, and if he does hurt Helen he would beat him to death and drink his blood. Reacher asks for their location, and tells Charlie if he as much as thinks Helen has been hurt, he would disappear, and if he's smart that should scare him. Charlie gives him the location, and they get their ambush ready for Reacher. Cash meets up with Reacher, and hands him a knife. Reacher thinks he's joking, and restates how serious the situation was. Cash tells him he's aware and that's why he showed up, but he's unwilling to let him kill someone with his gun. They both plan out their strategy to get into the base as Cash would provide him cover, but Reacher is worried if his shooting skills are still competent enough. Meanwhile inside the base, Helen asks the Zek if the money he's making is enough to justify killing all those people. The Zek tells her there is no such thing as justification, as they take what can be taken. She turns to Emerson and asks why he did it. Emerson replies that she makes it sound like he had a choice. Reacher calls again to know if Helen is okay, and she tells him that they are ready for him. She pleads with him not to put his life in danger for her. He tells her to hang on and to say she believes is coming to get her. Which she does. Reacher drives in reverse in a padded vehicle into the base while coming under heavy fire. Eventually, the vehicle gets stuck, and while Cash provides him with some cover he manages to get out. Reacher, defenseless at this point, hides behind some rocks. Soon he manages to take out one of the men shooting at him. He takes his gun and takes out the other. Charlie goes to the main room to send out more reinforcement, but the two men are easily taken out by Reacher. Charlie advises the Zek to leave, before stepping outside to search for Reacher. He steps out and discovers that every single one of his men has been taken out by Reacher. Soon he gets caught off guard and disarmed by Reacher. Reacher, desiring a fist fight instead, puts his gun down, and soon a tough battle ensues between both men. While both men show great stamina, Reacher gains the upper hand and breaks Charlie's leg. This makes him pull out a knife, and he attacks Reacher ferociously. Reacher manages to defend himself, and he knocks his opponent out. Emerson, now scared, uses Helen as a body shield, but Reacher pulls out a perfect shot, killing him. Helen is greatly relieved to see Reacher. Reacher meets the Zek for the first time. While Helen tries to contact the police, Reacher tells the Zek that he would feel right at home in prison. The Zek replies that prison in America would be a retirement home, if he goes there at all. Reacher, convinced the system would not deliver justice, points a gun to the Zek, and pulls the trigger. Helen asks him what about bringing the bad guys to justice, and Reacher explains that he just did. Reacher says his final goodbye to Helen, and Helen, not wishing to see him leave, asks how she would be able to find him if she needs him. Reacher replies that she'll do fine, and she doesn't need him anymore. Helen goes to see Barr, and Barr tells her he has no wish to fight the case. He confesses to her that he's done bad things before and got away with it. Helen promises that he would be okay, but he refuses to believe her. He tells her no one can protect him from Reacher. Then we see Reacher leaving on a bus, and the movie ends here. You're welcome to share your thoughts on this movie in the comment section below. Subscribe to my channel for more movie recaps like this one, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay well, thanks. Welcome to Golden Recaps. In today's video, we'll be going through the 2011 sci-fi thriller movie, Limitless. Spoilers ahead, watch out. Make sure to subscribe to our channel, and press the bell icon so we'll bring you more interesting recaps like these. Eddie Mora is an aspiring writer living in New York. For the past several months, he's been living off a book contract advance and financial support from his girlfriend. The only problem is Eddie hasn't been able to complete a single page of his book. He struggles with putting together the words for his story, going through a circle of writing, deleting, and starting over. He spends his afternoon drinking at a bar or wasting away on his couch in a messy apartment. Eventually his girlfriend Lindy leaves him. While walking home, Vernon calls out to him. Vernon is Eddie's ex-wife's brother. After a little cheat-chat, Vernon convinces him to have a drink together. They go to a bar, and Vernon tells him how Melissa is doing. Then they start talking about Eddie's creative problems, and Vernon suggests he can help him. He shows him the drug he's selling. It's called NZT, a drug designed to help you access 100% of your brain power. Eddie doesn't feel this is a solution to his problem. Vernon needs to leave, and he gives him a sample of the drug for free and also his business card. On his way home, Eddie contemplates on his life, thinking he's hit rock bottom. Then he goes ahead to take the NZT. He runs into his landlord's wife, Valerie, who hates him. She shouts on Eddie, but he had lost focus on what the lady is saying as the NZT is taking effect. He feels dizzy and the drug's effect finally hits. He sees the lady's bag and in it a book about law. Eddie deducts that the lady dislikes him, but something else must be bordering her. He asks about law school, and Valerie is surprised Eddie knows she's studying law. Eddie recalls seeing the book once several years ago in a dorm room, while he was still in college. Somehow he now remembers everything he's ever read, seen, and heard in his entire life. Eddie then recommends a different book on the law that will be appropriate for her assignment. He continues advising her on how to proceed with her assignment. The lady is impressed, even attracted by Eddie's mastery of law and court. She invites him in, he helps with her assignment, and they eventually have intercourse. Eddie is perplexed by how he suddenly had all of this knowledge, and he realizes that he always had this knowledge, but just in a random mess in his head. The NZT must have helped his brain rearrange and analyze the pieces of information he has in his head, and turn them into a congruent and organized thought that he now has access to. Every documentary, magazine article, movie, commercial, and anything he's ever read or seen has now become an accessible stream of useful information. He heads back to his dirty apartment and starts cleaning. He starts writing and ends up with a 90-page preliminary manuscript. The following day, he feels the NZT's effect had worn off. He takes his manuscript to his editors. The editor is doubtful but reads it anyway. Eddie reaches home and receives a voice message from his editor praising him. Eddie then decides he needs more NZT, and he proceeds to Vernon's apartment. Eddie shows up at Vernon's apartment, and Vernon immediately knows what Eddie wants. Vernon then reveals that he lied about NZT being legal and approved by the FDA. Regardless, Eddie still wants more. Vernon asks Eddie to head out to do some chores, and Eddie complies. Thinking he needs to do what's necessary to get more NZT. He arrives back at the apartment and sees the door busted open. He finds Vernon's apartment has been ransacked and Vernon on the couch with a bullet hole in his head. Eddie calls the police but realizes he needs to find Vernon's NZT stash before the cops arrive. He finds a pack of NZT along with Vernon's list of clients, and cash. At the police station, Eddie is interviewed and gets a phone call from Melissa. The police then tell Eddie that they'll stay in contact. At home, Eddie takes another pill, and his creative juices start flowing. With Vernon's cash, Eddie gets a haircut and new clothes. He starts getting in shape and even finishes his book in 4 days. He learns to play the piano in 3 days and notices that he can learn any language just by listening to it. Eddie becomes outgoing, meeting new people and impressing everyone with his mastery of almost any field. He becomes daring, his shyness gone, and he feels he can achieve anything he's ever wanted. Eddie gets a realization and suddenly knows what he needs to do. He decides to venture into the world of stock trading. He meets Kelvin, a broker working on Wall Street, and he becomes Eddie's entry point into the world of stocks. Eddie starts reading books on stock trading and monitors the stock market for movement. With NZT, he grew Vernon's remaining $800 to $2,000 in a day. The next day, it reaches $7,500. Eddie needs more capital for growth and decides to seek help from a loan shark, Gennady. Gennady decides to give Eddie the loan but warns that he must be paid on time. Eddie takes the risk, confident that he would pay Gennady back in no time. The following day, Eddie heads to Kelvin's brokerage firm and starts buying and selling stocks. Within 2 weeks, Eddie increased his brokerage account to over $2 million. Word started getting around and soon Kelvin calls him to say that a Wall Street tycoon wants to meet with him. That evening Eddie has dinner with Lindy, and he tells her all the amazing things he has been doing with his life. Seeing Eddie clean up his act, Lindy is proud. Eddie tells her, he just got a sudden wake-up call and decided to get his life together. After dinner, they head back to Lindy's apartment and make love. Over the next couple of days, the couple rediscovers their love, and soon Lindy tells Eddie that she wants to be together with him again. As they talk about restarting their relationship, Eddie spots a man eyeing them from a distance. Later that night, Lindy is in bed asking him to join her, but Eddie stumbles and is transported to the hallway in an instant. Eddie has no recollection of how he got out of his apartment, but Lindy sees him and asks him to go inside for a meal. The following day, Kevin joins Eddie for a meeting with the Wall Street giant. Kelvin is nervous, but Eddie assures him that the meeting would be fine. Carl Van Loo, a Wall Street icon, arrives, and they start talking. Carl's companion is suspicious of Eddie, and how he climbed up the ladder so fast, thinking it's a con. But Eddie talks his way through his questioning and impresses Carl. On a car ride home, Carl hands Eddie a stack of papers about all the companies he owns. Carl asks Eddie to take a look and analyze a pattern. Carl asks Eddie what a good move would be. Eddie takes a look and realizes that Carl must be planning a massive merger with a competing company. Carl is impressed even further, noticing how nobody could have figured that out in such a short amount of time. Carl gives Eddie a chance to restructure the deals between the two companies and asks Eddie to meet him the following day. He went out walking. Still, he finds himself having episodes of unconsciousness, finding himself in different parts of the city and having no recollection as to how he got there. He stumbles into several parties, into different clubs, meets different women, and eventually ends up in a hotel room with a model where they have intercourse. Eddie is unaware the strange man he had seen earlier is following him. After leaving the hotel, Eddie heads to the subway, where he runs into a group of thugs and gets into a fight. The NZT helps him remember every self-defense video, action movie, fight scene, and survival documentary he had ever seen, and he manages to fight off the group of thugs single-handedly. He starts running afterward and finds himself on top of the broken bridge by dawn with no recollection of what happened to him in the past 18 hours. Eddie heads home and goes to bed, and he wakes up the next day feeling horrible. He decides not to take another tablet and tries to go over the documents sent to him by Carl, but they seem ineligible. Eddie goes to the meeting sober and unprepared. Carl keeps asking him questions, expecting high-level answers from him, but all Eddie can focus on is the TV, where the news is reporting that the woman he was in the hotel with is dead. Eddie leaves the meeting abruptly. He heads home and gets a call from Melissa, who's asking questions about Vernon's death. Eddie asks her if they can meet up somewhere, and Melissa reluctantly agrees. Eddie goes through Vernon's notebook, looks up Vernon's clients, and calls them to find out more about the effects of NZT. Each number he calls, everyone on the list is either dead or sick. The last number he dials belongs to the man who followed him, and who's sitting near to him. It's the same man who had followed Eddie and the model to the hotel. Eddie sees him and runs as the man chases after him. He finally loses him by going inside a cab. He meets with Melissa, and she tells him she has also been on and barely made it out alive when she stopped using it. 2 years have passed and the effect still hasn't worn off. She recommends that Eddie stops taking the pill too, but she tells him to lower the dosage, as a sudden stop might be lethal. He heads home but runs into Gennady. Gennady beats up Eddie and demands his payments. They stumble the way up Eddie's apartment, and Eddie drops an NZT pill. Then he picks up the key, believing it to be some type of drug, and takes it himself. They then head to the bank, and Eddie gives him the money. Gennady notes that the pills made him feel excellent, and he would be asking for more soon. Eddie makes his way to Lindy's office and collapses. Eddie is left with no choice but to tell Lindy everything. Lindy finally understands the source of Eddie's new motivation. After he tells her he stashed the rest of the pills in her apartment, she agrees to retrieve the pills for him. She heads home, takes the rest of the drugs, and heads back. On her way back she notices a strange man following her. She runs into the city park and asks 2 men to help her, but the strange man stabs both men and continues chasing after Lindy. Lindy hides behind some boulders and calls Eddie. Eddie advises her to take one of the pills, as it would give her the power to overcome the situation, and she does. After the pill takes effect, she knows what she has to do to escape from the man chasing her. She runs into the ice skating ring and carries a child, spinning her around, allowing the child's ice skate to slash the man's face. The man falls, and Lindy gets away. The following day, Lindy expresses her concern about the pill, saying it turned her into a completely different person. Eddie promises he will stop taking the pill as soon as he gets enough money. On the street, Eddie sees Gennady spying on him. Eddie approaches and Gennady says he needs more of the pill. Eddie gives him a few but realizes that he won't stop. Later he hires 2 bodyguards that follow him anywhere. He goes to see Carl, and he apologizes for the meeting, explaining he was sick, but he already won him over before, so Carl still gives him the job. He brokers the biggest merger in the city for Carl and gets back on his feet. Eddie discovered that if he slept properly, stayed hydrated and fed, abstained from alcohol, and maintained a steady dose, the blacked out episode stopped. He has suits custom made for him, all with a hidden pocket for the NZT he has. Not waiting around until his stash of the drug runs out. He goes to a chemist and tells him that he would give him $2 million if he could recreate the drug in 6 months. While having lunch, he spots the detective that interviewed him about Vernon's death. The detective informs him that Eddie is now a suspect in the model's death, as one eyewitness placed him at the crime scene. Eddie hires Morris Brandt, one of the best and most ruthless lawyers in New York. Brandt gets him walking free temporarily, saying the evidence the police had is too weak. Carl and Eddie meet with Atwood again, and they observe Atwood deteriorating health. Eddie heads back to his hotel room and finds his room trashed. Security is now a primary concern, so he buys a luxurious penthouse apartment with a top-of-the-notch security system. Later, Eddie runs into Gennady, who now has his own set of thugs guiding him. Gennady demands 20 more pills and blackmails Eddie with the model's death. The next day, Carl and Eddie are waiting for Atwood to come in and sign the merger, but he doesn't show up. His wife comes to the office to tell them he's sick, but as soon as he is better he would sign the contract. The 2 of them walk her out, and as she is going into the car, Eddie sees that the man who has been following him is getting inside the car with her. Her husband was sick because of the drug. Eddie meets his lawyer at a police station and gets into a police lineup. Eddie takes his jacket off and hands it to Brandt. After the lineup, he meets up with Brandt again, and he tells Eddie that he's cleared of suspicion. Brandt then compliments Eddie's suit jacket. He makes his way back to Carl's office and discovers Atwood is now in a coma. He heads to the bathroom to take another pill and discovers his secret pocket is empty. His stash is gone. Then he goes back to Carl and a package is brought to him. He opens it and sees his disembodied bodyguard's hand inside. In shock, he runs out of Carl's office and hurries home. He watches the news report regarding updates on Atwood's situation and sees that Brandt is also Atwood's attorney. Eddie then hears banging at his door, and he notices from the security camera that Gennady has arrived with his goons, using metal grinders and steel cutters to break in. Stuck in an inescapable situation, Eddie steps up to the balcony. He stops himself when his foot slips, trying to remember if he had left even just a single tablet somewhere. He digs through his mind and recalls one being left in his old tin container. He reaches through his boxes and finds it, but Gennady breaks in and Eddie trips on a box, losing the pill. Gennady's boys pin Eddie down, and he shows Eddie an even better way of using NZT. He dissolves it and injects it directly into his bloodstream. He says it's more potent this way, and also lasts longer. He shoots up and instructs his men to find Eddie's stash, while he tortures him for the information. The henchmen start grinding into the safe in the next room, while Gennady approaches Eddie, but Eddie stabs him with a knife he had earlier concealed. The two struggle and Eddie drives the knife into Gennady, killing him. Eddie lays on the floor next to a bleeding Gennady. He eyes the needle Gennady had used to inject himself and decides to drink Gennady's blood, hoping to get some of the NZT into him. It works, and his brain starts working at total capacity. Now he knows how to fight off the goons. He takes down one of them, and then the other. Meanwhile, Atwood dies at the hospital. Eddie appears at the hospital and sits next to the driver. He wonders how Atwood died even though they successfully got the NZT pills for him. The driver then helps Eddie find Brandt. When they get there, they end up finding out that Brandt had kept the pills for himself rather than give them to Atwood. They find the drugs and Brandt closest. 12 months later, Eddie has a book out and is running for the Senate. He gets a call that a man representing a large pharmaceutical firm is waiting for him in his office. Eddie is surprised to see that the man is Carl. Carl now reveals that he knows about NZT. He tells Eddie that the company he owns manufactures the drug. Carl offers Eddie a steady supply of NZT, in exchange for a few favors he would later ask. Eddie refuses Carl's offer, but Carl warns that the illegal NZT labs have all been shut down. Eddie then reveals that he doesn't take NZT anymore. He had the drug tweaked and edited way back, removing the side effects. He slowly took less and less NZT until he no longer depended on it, but the effect of the drug remained on him. The modified NZT had permanently altered his brain patterns. Now Eddie's brain is fully unlocked even off the drug. Eddie shows this by predicting that a van would hit a car because the driver is distracted. Carl looks over and it happens. Eddie then places his hand on Carl's chest, saying he detects several problems in Carl's heart. Carl warns Eddie that he would be a brutal enemy, but Eddie is not threatened, saying he would always be 50 steps ahead of him. Eddie walks to a restaurant and meets with Lindy there. You're welcome to share your thoughts on this movie in the comment section below. Subscribe to my channel for more movie recaps like this one, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay well, thanks. Welcome to Free City. A city that's got a bland nature, and where folks running around in sunglasses get to do whatever the fuck they want. Hey YouTubing fam, please, like and share the content, and don't forget to smash that subscribe button and press the notification icon so you can catch new videos. Wakes up, wears the same outfit, orders the same coffee, and goes to work at the same bank every day for 4 years. Everything is awesome for Guy, and his best pal Buddy in Free City, except Guy wishes he could find the woman he has always dreamed of. Then we see an invasion of the bank by heavily armed robbers, but Guy, Buddy, and everyone else in the bank doesn't seem to care, and just lay on the floor. Later, a woman who we find out to be named Molotov Girl meets up with a man in a mask, and he gives her a piece of tech which has the location of a stash house in exchange for some cash. After work, Guy and Buddy walk along the street, and Guy spots Molotov Girl. He's instantly captured by her. Just when she walks past him, she tries to mimic the phrase Guy usually says to everyone, and she is surprised when instead Guy tells her he loves the song she's singing. She instantly recognizes this as a new development, but she keeps on moving. Buddy helplessly tries to snap him out of his trance, but when he finally does, Guy decides to go after the girl. He gets smashed by a train before he could get a chance to talk to her. After this, we see that Molotov Girl is a programmer named Millie back in the real world, and Free City is a widely successful OpenAI video game. Millie was in Free City trying to find some evidence that the egocentric publisher Antoine stole her code, and deformed it into this bland experience. Guy wakes up again, and now seeming a little more self-aware, he tries to change from his usual routine, but hardly seems able to do so. The bank is under a robbery once again, and this time Guy successfully breaks out of his pattern. Now dueling with the player behind the thieves character for his sunglasses, Guy terminates the player from the game. He takes the glasses, and when he puts them on, he's exposed to a whole new world. He sees missions, med packs, hubs, weapons, armory stores, and other things familiar to modern games. The guy, still in shock, touches the med pack close to him, giving him a healthy boost. He also collects cash left by other players in the game. Meanwhile, Keys informs Mouser, his programming partner, that a game user's glasses were stolen by a non-player character also known as an NPC. Mouser is shocked and thinks that is impossible, and both seem to think that the NPC avatar, which is Guy, was being controlled by a genius hacker. They decide to take up characters, enter the game themselves, and go after Guy. When they first meet, they interact with him, asking how he got his skin. Guy feels he's being interrogated by the cops, and he tells them it's probably a result of good genetics. Guy doesn't seem to understand anything more they say, and soon they chase after him with weapons. He runs, taking shelter in a tall building. Noticing a jump feature on his new shoes, he activates it and leaps several stories, barely hanging on to one of the top floors. Mouser and Keys, experts at the game, deploy different tactics and close in on Guy. In a desperate attempt not to get shot, Guy sprints off the building's ledge, jumping to catch a wrecking ball, but misses. He's only saved from hitting the ground by a bubble suit activated from his glasses, but gets hit by a cop car with Keys and Mouser in it. Although they succeed in killing Guy, Keys still finds it weird that there has been no change in the number of players online. Mouser tells him to stop being paranoid, and not to even think about mentioning anything to Antoine, their boss. Mouser asks Keys, who's an MIT graduate and genius programmer, why he deals with customer complaints instead of working where his skills are a better fit. Keys just reply that that's a long story. Then we see an interview. Keys talks about a new game he's been working on, called Life Itself. They talk about their idea for the game, as being an observatory experience, where people don't play the game, but watch the characters grow, interact, and evolve. Millie is also present, and he gives her total credit for building the AI engine for the game from scratch. The interviewer asks about the chemistry between both of them, and if their relationship spans beyond just work. Millie immediately says, no, they are just friends, and Keys, who felt like saying more, agrees with her. We see this interview being played back by Millie, who had broken into Keys' apartment. Keys, just getting back home from work, almost jumps out of his skin when Millie switches on the light. Keys pleads with her to leave, as talking to her would violate his NDA, and get him fired. Millie mentions that Antoine, who Keys currently works for, stole their code from their original build to use in what she terms his dumb shooter game. She also tells Keys that Antoine is lying about it so he doesn't have to give them the credit and royalties they deserve. She asks for his help in getting to the clue she found, but Keys tells her she needs to leave. Then we see Guy wake up again, and he tells his fish, today is going to be different. He takes out a different outfit from his closet. Millie has located the stash house and is surveying from a distance when she's interrupted by Guy. She politely asks who he was, and Guy hastily reminds her they ran into each other, which she recalls. Their conversation is soon cut short by heavy fire coming from the stash house. Millie takes a portal gun and opens an escape route, which they both pass through. They arrived at what seemed to be a secret safe house filled with motorcycles, guns, and other weapons. She tells him she was busy trying to steal something, and he offers to help. Millie tells him she prefers to work alone, and if he's to have any chance of making an impact he needs to be higher than his current level. Guy asks how he can attain a higher level. Millie, surprised by his questions, tells him he needs to get more stuff, money, and experience by robbing stores, carjacking, or figuring something out. Guy tells her he'll never hurt innocent people. Then she suggests he could also rack points by being the good guy, and if he gets over 100 points they could talk. Guy chooses only the positive missions, and levels up so fast he becomes an internet success in the process as the world tries to figure out who this mysterious gamer might be. He goes to see his best friend Buddy, who's upset Guy doesn't show up for work anymore. Guy tells him he talked to the girl wearing the sunglasses. He takes a new pair of sunglasses from another player, and gives them to Buddy, telling him it's going to change his life, but Buddy refuses to wear them, and Guy is disappointed. Millie breaks into the stash house with some help from Keys, but just as she takes the video clip, and tries to leave, she's intercepted by guards shooting heavily at her. Guy charges in with a motorcycle, taking out the guards, but then they are faced with more guards. Guy tries to ask why she came to the stash house, and she replied she came to steal a video clip, but now they should try not to die. The fighting goes on and Guy is captivated by the way she fights. Guy takes a motorcycle and screams they need to leave. Millie soon joins him, still shooting at the enemy. They ride out the window. Millie states she doesn't suppose the motorcycle can fly.
No.
Then she opens a parachute and they glide off to safety. Antoine arrives at Tsunami Studio. His employees immediately start giving him various reports he doesn't seem to care about. Antoine talks of his plans to use Guy's skin in Free City 2, and upgrade him to a hitman. Antoine had also previously lied to the fans that Free City 2 would be backward compatible with Free City 1. Guy takes Millie to his private stash house, telling her he took her advice and leveled up. Millie was impressed and asked why he was doing all of this. Guy explained that he has always felt stuck until he saw her. Millie asks about who he was in the real world, but he keeps telling her his name is Guy. She asked how he pulled off leveling up so fast, thinking Guy had a cheat to the game. She asked about how he got his skin, and Guy wonders why everyone keeps asking him that. She leans closer to him and Guy tries to figure out what's happening at that moment. She stops asking questions, and as she's about leaving, Guy asked her if she likes ice cream. They go out walking through a quiet park. He orders the bubble gum flavored ice cream, pleading with her to try it. This makes her excited as it's also her favorite flavor of ice cream. He makes her laugh about it, and she tells him that he's funny, but in a weird way. While Guy and Millie bond, and get to know more about each other, Keys, back in the real world, researches through the NPC characters and finds shocking information about Guy. Meanwhile, Millie is finding it so weird that she has so much in common with Guy. Guy then tells her he wishes to kiss her, and she tells him to go for it if he knows how to. He leans forward and kisses her, but the actual Millie just watches her character make out with Guy from her screen. Guy exclaims after the kiss that it had felt so much better than he expected. Millie had to leave, because there was someone at her door, but before leaving she tells Guy she would love to meet him again, possibly in the real world. He nods, not catching that. She tells Guy that her real name is Millie and he responds that his real name continues to be Guy. She takes off her headset and opens up the door for Keys, who has been banging on it. Keys rushes in and begins to tell her she was right about everything and that their game, life itself, where characters would grow and evolve, works. Millie thinks he's crazy. He goes further to explain that the underlying code in Free City is the same as their code, and that's what makes it so realistic. He also explains that Blue Shirt Guy is not a player, but a remarkable breakthrough in artificial intelligence, and that's why Guy believes he's alive, which technically he is. Millie lost her mind and refused to believe any of Key's theories. "Guy, my Guy," she exclaims. Keys explains to her that this is a good thing and that the NPC all have private lives and are learning on their own to do several things, which he found astonishing. Millie disagrees, as all she could think of was she let Guy kiss her. Then we realize Millie in the real world was also falling for Guy. Keys, confused, states that there isn't a button for that, but she confessed that
Oh, he found the button.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then Keys tells her that Antoine had lied about everything, and wanted Free City 2 as an update, but as a replacement, and when it launches, Blue Shirt Guy and all proof of their code would be deleted. Keys suggests that if they could find their original build before Free City 2 launches in about 48 hours, then they have a shot at providing evidence that Antoine used their code without properly licensing it. Millie tells him she's tried to find it before, then Keys suggests now they both know about Guy, he could be the perfect inside man. Millie goes to meet Guy, and tells him they need to talk. Guy asked if she's married, and was relieved she wasn't, as he felt that would be the worst news. Millie takes Guy to the multiplayer lounge, and in there she tells him that Free City is a video game, and she and those in sunglasses are players back in the real world. She tells him that he only exists here in Free City, which is why he can never leave, and he's what is called an NPC. Guy remembers being called this by the cops who chased after him, but doesn't understand. She explains that the NPCs are non-playable characters in the background designed to make the game fun for the real players. Guy gets upset, and wonders why she's saying all of this, stating that he loves her. She tells him that he was programmed to think he does. Guy storms off, and she follows him, pleading that he should listen to her as they don't have much time, and the game is going to shut down for good in 2 days. The city, himself and all the people who aren't players would be gone forever. Guy then goes around telling everyone that nothing they do matters and that they're all just pawns in someone else's scheme. Before he could finish preaching, he gets hit by a car. Guy goes to visit Buddy, seeking some advice and clarity. He asks Buddy what he would do if he found out he wasn't real, and Buddy says it wouldn't matter to him, as helping his best friend get through a tough moment feels real to him. Then Guy and Buddy go to the stash house to help Millie get the video clip she needed. They wait, and when the owner of the stash house comes out, he seems to be a huge fan of Guy. He instantly starts recording a vlog for his fans. He hands them the clips, and they leave. Guy goes to see Millie, who's currently offline, but gets terrified when she comes online giving her the video clip. Guy's continuous internet fame vexes Antoine as he feels pre-sales of Free City 2 are down because everyone is so focused on what is up with the Blue Shirt Guy. Antoine tells his employees that he wants Guy gone, and Mouser comes up with an idea to reboot the server, reverting Guy back to a regular non-player. Mouser reboots the server, and several terabytes of data disappear instantly. Guy walks through a frozen time lapse. Every player is temporarily kicked offline. Wakes up to his usual morning routine. Millie tracks Guy down and tries getting him to remember all that has transpired between them, but Guy tells Millie that he's sorry, but she must have him mistaken for someone else. Keys calls up Millie and tells her Guy's AI coding can't be erased by just a reboot, and even though he doesn't seem to remember anything, his AI is still intact, and only needs to be accessed. Keys sends Millie a trace log explaining that Guy's behavior is much more complex than it should be, but he's still stuck in his usual routine. Keys in the log talks about how he designed a character in the original game never to meet the right person, but also designed this character never to stop hoping that he'd meet the girl of his dreams. Keys had based the dream girl off Millie, because of how he felt working close to her every day. Keys explained that Guy's AI coding only transformed when he met her and that she changed Guy, bringing him to life. Keys believes that Millie can somehow replicate this effect again. Then we see Millie going to rob the bank, taking Guy hostage. Millie tells Guy that there's something inside of him, and he's much more than someone stuck at the bank just following the rules, doing the same thing every day. Guy comments that he wishes to have nothing inside him, and he loves the bank. She forces him to put on the glasses, but he freaks out when he has them on. Millie tells him that his world is going to be gone in 24 hours, and while Guy doesn't seem to care, and just wants to be out of harm's way, she blows up the cop car chasing after them and kisses him. Guy tells her he remembers everything, and he takes her back to his apartment. He flips his window blinds, showing Millie the reflections on them, and she realizes Antoine, while scraping their game, forgot the reflections. She tells him their original design is still out there, and if they can somehow get there, that'll be all the evidence she needs. Keys also begin working on a way to expand the game's physics, and get them past the beach where their original design is hidden. He tells Millie they're going to need a bridge. Keys also warns her that Antoine is going to find out about her plans soon enough, and throw everything he's got at them. Guy then suggests he could make sure Antoine has nothing to throw. Then we see Guy bring together all the NPCs. He asks if they are sick of living in the background or getting shot at every day or being used as a human shield. They all agree that they're tired of these things, but could not understand what Guy was getting at. He tells them things in the city could be a lot different. They ask how, and he starts by asking a man whose natural position was having his hands up, to put them down. The man attempts to do this, but gives up, stating it feels so unnatural to put his hands down since anyone could walk in with a gun at any time. Guy tells them what if they don't have to worry about people with guns anymore. They all listen intently. He talks about a city where they've got nothing to be afraid of, where they all get to be who they want to be. They all love his thought process. Then he tells them that it's something they're going to have to fight for. The bank gets robbed again, but this time there's no one in. The streets are also empty. The internet goes crazy over the disappearance of the NPCs, and everyone begins to learn about Guy's underlying technology as being an actual breakthrough in artificial intelligence as the reason he's trending everywhere. The whole thing makes Antoine so sick, and he becomes even more furious when he finds footage of Guy stealing a video clip, and he realizes Guy and Millie has been working together. He tells Mouser to boot Millie out from the system. Mouser tells him he's trying, but can't find her because her account is spoofed. Then Antoine tells Mouser to throw everything he's got at them, but Mouser tells him all the NPCs have gone on strike, and they've got nothing. Antoine disagrees, and instructs Mouser to use the game's physics, and make them extinct. Mouser tries hard to do this, but he's blocked by keys. When Antoine feels he's got no other option, he tells his art nerds to drop in Dude. They illustrate that Dude has got like half a brain and is not yet ready. Antoine doesn't seem to care. Antoine finally catches up to Keys. He asks if he's come to collect the knife stabbed to his back as he'd been working with Millie Russ the whole time. Keys challenges Antoine that if indeed he never used their code, he shouldn't be worried that Millie is going to find anything. Antoine finally throws out the bullshit. He tells Keys that if he hadn't transformed the game, changing the whole concept of their original build, it would have failed. Keys is outraged that they got left out by Antoine when it came to the profits Free City made, but Antoine told him he'd choose sides. Keys activate the bridge in front of Antoine, and soon he gets news of its formation beyond the water beach area. Antoine instructs Mouser to boot every player out of the game, and Guy sees that Millie is leaving. She urges him to go through with the mission. Just as Keys is being taken out of the building, Dude's upload into the game got completed. Guy didn't realize instantly what hit him. Dude was a more macho-like, alpha male version of Guy. It seemed like game over for Guy. Dude takes his time to give Guy a good old-fashioned ass-whooping. Guy was fucked up. Guy recovered quickly though and defended a finishing move from Dude called the death blow, throwing his own punch. Guy pulls out popular moves from his collection, but ended up getting pinned down by Dude. He was about to get killed when Buddy threw his glasses. He couldn't come up fast with anything, so he decides to use the glasses on Dude. Keys about exiting the building sights Antoine entering the server room. Keys messages Millie at once. Antoine has gone mad and is about to completely destroy the server room. Guy and Buddy are caught up in the effect. Buddy got trapped, and he tells Guy he should complete the mission without him. Guy was able to jump into Millie's build in time to avoid getting destroyed, and Millie makes a deal with Antoine to save the data from going extinct. Sales of Free City 2 takes a plunge, and Antoine finds himself in the crosshairs. Then we see Guy and Millie walking through a pack, and are talking. The rest of the NPCs made it also and were saved. Guy knows Millie has to return back to her world, and he urges her to do so. Millie asks what he's going to do then. He replies whatever he wants, thanks to her. They get emotional, and Guy tells Millie he loves her, and maybe it's just his programming talking, but somebody out there wrote that program. Millie finally understands all of Key's behavior towards her, remembering his remarkable idea of bringing Guy to life by making him meet the woman of his dreams, and the whole cause and effect were based on her. She realizes that Keys had mastered skillfully every little detail about her. She goes after him and catches up with him at the coffee stores. Keys is surprised, but they take a glance at each other, and Keys realizes, she knows everything now. Both acknowledge the special bond they share. He goes to her and kisses her. Meanwhile, Guy misses Buddy and talks to Dude about him, but Dude was dull as a motherfucker. Then Guy gets so excited seeing Buddy for the first time ever since Free City got destroyed. Buddy asks since there's no bank what they got to do now and, Guy replies whatever they want.